Okay, we're at time. Good morning. Welcome to the IETF. Welcome to the Lake and ACE session. My name is Stephen Farrell. I'm one of the Lake co-chairs. And Militia, do you want to send video and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. This is Militia speaking. Thank you, Stephen, for leading the intro.
No problem. There's Militia is remote today, and we have a bunch of presentations. I think only Marco is. Oh no. For Lake, I think it's only Marco present, and is yours in ACE? Yeah. Okay. And I think we have the ACE chairs online as well. And I'm told that they've decided to run the ACE meeting starting at the end of the Lake meeting, which may be before 10:30. And they've sent a mail to the ACE list to say that. So it's slight schedule change, but I guess it saves us a bit of time. Okay. So here's the note. Well, I guess this is the first time you've seen it this week. It tells you to, we should behave. There are rules about IPR. There's a whole bunch of rules, and they're all linked up there. And that's that. Like I say, this is the Lake slot. We're sharing the session slot with ACE, which will start instead of at 10:30. If Lake finishes early, which I expect it will, we'll continue straight on into ACE, and their working group knows about that. So if you're here in the room, you need to please do log into the data tracker by scanning that QR code or the one that's on a piece of paper been passed around, or otherwise logging into the data tracker so that we know you're at the meeting. And there's the full Meet Echo tool, and there's the on-site one, which is abbreviated. I haven't tried it recently, so. Here's links to our agenda, etc. Since you're either in the meeting remotely or here present, I guess you've seen that. Not sure what that slide is doing there. And the session's being recorded. So just a status check with the ad hoc draft, which is our kind of main work item in Lake, is out of the working group. Our AD had a good idea, and with which the working group agreed. So it's currently an IETF last call, which will end in a week or so. So again, if you haven't read the ad hoc drafts, it's in IETF last call. Now's a good time to do that. Because of the late change we made to ad hoc, the traces draft needs to be redone. That's in work, and we'll be talking about it. And the working group, we rechartered. That's gone through the IESG process, and the working group is now rechartered to do future work. We haven't really kind of started substantively on that yet, so we won't be talking too much about it today. And this is our agenda for this morning, which is kind of light but and obvious. So we'll have a status check on the ad hoc and last call comments, which I'm not sure if we've actually gotten any on the last call list so far.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. We might get late surprises, who knows? And then Marco's going to talk about the traces drafts, and Joran's going to talk about authorization, and we have an update on the charter, but I guess everybody has seen that on the list. So I'm not sure there's any interesting update on the charter other than to tell you it's there.
So maybe we could just use the slot to align on the new work that is coming for the Prague meeting, and just sync up with people on the items that are in the charter during the slot. Yeah.
Yeah. So a little bit of planning. And does anybody now's a good time if you have any comments on the agenda or want to bash the agenda in any way? No, I forgot to say we have minute takers. Marco is as usual, being very helpful, and Tero is also helping with the minutes. So we have note takers. And Militia, I guess you can keep an eye on the chat room a little bit more easily than I can when you're remote. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thanks. So we have Christian, Tero, and Marco as the note takers that I see in the list, and they seem to be taking notes already.
And we have an automatic translation tool. I'm not sure how it's doing yet. It could be funny, we'll see. Okay, all good with the agenda? In that case, do we have John? Is John in the there we go.
I think I will speak, yeah. So,
slides share.
Right.
So I can give you control of the slides.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good. You look good.
Thank you. Göran Selander, and thanks for the intro. So this will be a short presentation about the state of ad hoc as of version 20. And basically, that's what's happened since IETF 116. And most of the updates are based on the AD review and some cleanups of old issues. So we closed all the issues on the GitHub tracker. And as we already mentioned here, that's we're waiting for last call comments to come in. So there are 3 slides about the latest updates. So here's a summary of the new version. And the main changes were encryption of CR in message 2, and there is a new error code for unknown reference credential, new subsection. And those are described in the following 2 slides. And there were a bunch of minor changes as well. The error code 0 is now explicitly reserved for success. There was a section on message deduplication in the appendix, which is moved to the body. Now in section, it should say section 7 there, is the section number is missing. And there were some changes in terminology, aligning terms like protocol run, exchange, or session were used interchangeably. And now we're only using the term session. And we moved from discontinued to aborted. So there's some alignment of the terminology. There are also some clarifications, in particular when to derive application keys. So that was something that the implementers had different views on, so we were made clear on when that's allowed to happen, and also the role of the application for performing authentication. 2 headers, COSI headers, are introduced in this document. It's one for CBOR web tokens and one for CBOR web token claim sets. But the security considerations for those were missing. So that's been added in version 20. That's things like, the CCS, the CWT claim set, is essentially a raw public key. So if you're sending that as a credential, you need to know that there has to be some other way of establishing trust. So that's the example of the content of those security considerations, and some updated references. So those were the minor changes, and then we had the 2 main changes. The first one was on encryption of CR. So as you remember, the connection identifier CI and CR are used to simplify for the receiving party to retrieve the protocol state, so get the security context in place to process the message. And those are defined by the initiator and responder, respectively, in message 1 and message 2. And in message 1, there is no way of encrypting CI because there is no keys to base that encryption on. But in message 2, there are actually keys. This is encrypted, that message. So it is possible to encrypt CR, which wasn't done. And one reason for that is that a typical use case is that you actually use CR in plain text in message 3. So because of the nature of these connection identifiers is to be a plain text handle that you could use to look up security context. So they can't typically be encrypted. But they can actually in message 2, and that since we are on the premises of always trying to encrypt as much as possible when possible, we also decided to encrypt CR. So this was one of the proposals from the AD review, and there were also consensus in the working group to do so. And that's so simply, simply from a specification point of view, you move the CR under the encryption into the plain text of message 2. And also fairly simple in implementation, but the entire traces draft need to be redone, of course, by this change. And there's also another change in the spec, and that relates to the transcript hash. So the transcript hash is needed to derive the keys to decrypt message 2. So you can't, if the CR is now encrypted, you can't have it included in the transcript hash. But it's included in the plain text of message 2, so it goes into the transcript hash number 3. So it's included in the transcript hash, but it's moved from TH2 to TH3. So that's essentially the change made when it comes to the encryption of CR. And then we had the final main change, which was a new error code. I already mentioned this explicitly reserved value, but a more bigger change was this new error code. This is thanks to a review comment by Brian Sipos. Very good comments. Thank you very much for those. And in particular, this comment, which is a type of action that we'd like to support with error codes. So as you may remember, error codes were only defined for the cases where we foresee some automated remediation, so that the receiving party could automatically fix with the error information of the error, actually do something, and which results in a successful session. And this was one example where this could happen. So the new error code number with value 3 is saying meaning unknown credential referenced. So it could be used, for example, in the case when the endpoints are using multiple credentials or either a credential or a credential reference. So the first time the endpoint are contacting each other, they use the credentials, a certificate chain, for example, or a certificate. And then the next time they are only using the reference. But then there might be a case when the certificate chain or the certificate is lost or deleted for space reasons in a constrained device. So you only have you don't have the actual credential available, and then you can use this error code to indicate that the actual credential is missing. Which means that with this error code, you could more easily use references with a greater freedom, and that's good because then you are using less data transported. So we thought it was a very good idea, and it's now included. And with that, all the main and also minor changes, I think I have sketched. So that's the last slide of this presentation. Are there any more questions on the latest version?
So we had someone joining the queue briefly, but I don't know if that was by mistake.
So yeah, I'm not seeing anybody in the room jumping up. So yeah, so okay. I guess we'll wait and see. Do we get any IETF last call comments that we need to react to? That was, that possibility was the main reason for organizing this session. So we didn't get anything so far. So that's good.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Find the right slides. Traces.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Marco Tiloca. This is an update on the traces draft. We are working towards version 6, where we plan to have militia also added to the author list. Next slide, please. So there was a few things to do on this document, including processing the comments from the AD review. Thanks, Paul, for that. And otherwise, the main thing was, of course, updating the actual values from the traces that had to be recomputed almost entirely, mainly for the change that Göran discussed before about the encryption of CR in message 2. Heads up, but I'll have more details soon. We have updated values. They are already all included in the editor's copy on the GitHub. But then we also work on the actual text other than the traces value, processing the AD review comments and some comments from Stephen from working group last call time, I think, even. Next slide, please. Yeah, on the traces, we started from the second one, actually, using ECDSA. We have two implementations updated to support basically the encryption of CR, really mine and malicious. We took that incrementally. We first agreed on the main final output from the execution, and then we compared the exact incremental results, and they match. So we fully validated this trace. And then to be even more sure, we ran an actual interop of the internet that succeeded. And again, this trace is also updated in the editor's copy already. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Oops. Thanks. Confident of the results on the second trace. I proceeded also with updating the editor's copy with the results for the first trace. Just for the record, in these slides, I put the main final result. Again, details on the editor's copy. And here we are really waiting for Marek to confirm the results of this first trace. But of course, anyone that has an updated implementation that can confirm other than Mark is more than welcome. Next, please. Okay, on the actual editorial updates, yeah, we had something from Stephen that actually John took care of a few weeks ago already. That was about missing fields in the certificates used for the first trace. That's already fixed in the editor's copy. I'm just pointing to the exact commits here. So the first comment was about the missing field, not before that was missing only in the diagnostic notation of the certificate. Well, the actual certificate and its serialization used in the trace was fine already. So no change in the traces because of that. It was just editorial. The second comment was about adding extensions and especially basic constraints in the certificate. We absolutely had to do that for the common root certificate. We did that, but it didn't take part of the exchange, so no change to the traces because of that. While the other certificates used as identity certificates and CREDAR and CREDI are actually compliant without those extensions, so no need to change those. So no change to the traces because of that. And again, this is addressed already in the editor's copy. Next slide, please. And finally, the AD review comment, those were mostly editorial comments. They were also addressed in a single commit. So we avoided an ambiguous use of R and especially I. Now they are spelled out explicitly. We make it explicitly pretty much everywhere now, I think, more than in the points I mentioned here. The sizes are in bytes, and then some really editorial needs on using hyperlinks. Next slide, please. So all the content we have in mind is already in the editor's copy, and the second trace got confirmed. Also, we are waiting for the first trace to be confirmed too. Marek is the candidate we have in mind mainly, but again, anyone that can confirm is welcome. And when we have that, we submit version 6. That should be really ready for the next step. Thanks.
Thanks, Marco. Any questions or comments? I guess not. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Brings us to our Joran, you're presenting this one?
Yeah, I am.
Fantastic. And yeah, you're still looking good, and we can hear you.
Thank you. I don't see the little handle with all the slides.
One second. On its way.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Okay. So this is a draft that's been around for a while under different names. It's a candidate for this working group, adapted to the new charter, and it's called lightweight authorization. For ad hoc, it had, yeah, that's the current name, and the basic setting. Here you see the authors, and let's go for next slide. So the basic setting here is, I think you've seen in other contexts, there is a device that wants to enroll into a domain over a constrained link. The device is called U here, and the domain is represented by a domain authenticator V. And they are mutually authenticating and authorizing each other with the help of a trusted third party, an enrollment server W, which is located behind V in a non-constrained network. And if you are familiar to the Brewski setup, you can call these, the pledge would be U, the JRC would be V, and the MASA would be W. We used to call W authorization server, and that turned out to be a bad name because there is that name is also used in ACE. So those are the parties, and there is also assumption on the explicit on trust relationships that the device has built in a public key from the manufacturer. It's a static Diffie-Hellman public key, which builds an explicit trust relationship from the factory. And we are also assuming implicit trust relation between the domain authenticator and the enrollment server in the form of for example, a web PKI, so that they trust common CAs. But U and V does not trust each other. That's the name of the game here, to establish the trust between U and V to join U in the domain. Okay, so that's the setup, and the core protocol is essentially going like this. So you have ad hoc running between U and V. That's the 3 messages indicated. And overlaid, there is an exchange of authorization-related information, which is starting from the device, going through the from U to V to W, and then back again. And between U and V, this information is passed in ad hoc in the external authorization data, the EAD fields. And between V and W, it's basically a REST exchange. I should also point out the term voucher here is used in the same meaning as in RFC 8366, but the kind of voucher we're using here is a much smaller object to match this constrained setting. So the state of this draft now in version 3 is that we have simplified the protocol significantly and updated the core protocol by separating out the parts that doesn't happen every time the device joins. So when a device joins, there is some communication between the party V and W, but the security for that you don't need to set up. If there is a certain network and a certain manufacturer, then you don't need to set up that, or a certain service provider and certain manufacturer. You don't need to set up that security every time. You can set up that beforehand, and also the proof of possession of the credential used by V, that can be proved once to the W, not every time. So that's one part of the update. There's also simplified in the sense that the protocol now doesn't have the previously there was some elements from message 1 being passed on. Now we are essentially forwarding message 1 and this voucher which contains the authorization information. So I'll show you the protocol in the next slide, but this is just going through the changes. And finally, there is an enabling of stateless operations of V during the REST exchange. I'll also mention that in the next slide. The details of the REST interface are now complete with HTTPS, CoAP-S, and CoAP using OSCore, and there is a IANA registration for the media type. Finally, it's aligned with the latest version of ad hoc. So here is the protocol in core protocol in full detail, or at least pretty detailed. The ad hoc message 1, which is the device send when it wants to join the network, sends message 1 with this particular EAD content. It has the location of W, which is also known from factory, and it has encrypted its device identity using this static Diffie-Hellman key provision from factory. And based on this information, V can make the voucher request from W and send it to the right W by using the locator, and it includes then the message 1, essentially. And this is sent through the secure channel, which is established between V and W at some point before this core protocol. And also the proof of possession, as we mentioned, is done before the core protocol. So W can then receive this message over a secure channel, decrypt the device ID, and based on the policies for authorization, decide if V is authorized, if you should join this network. V is an authorized network or service provider. And then it can construct the voucher as indicated here and pass back the message 1, the voucher, which is further distributed in message 2 back to you, where you can verify the voucher and complete the ad hoc message exchange. So that's an overview of the details of the protocol, and there is also the aspect of V being stateless here by this optional OPEC state field, where we can encapsulate essentially the contents of the request and forget about the ad hoc message 1 until it gets back the authorization from W, and then it can process message 1. And there's also an aspect of lookup of credential here. So the name of the game here is that we have the non-constrained part of the network between you and V, and we have the constrained part between you and V, and the non-constrained between V and W. So we move everything that's heavy over to the V and W side, and we also in time we try to do everything that's not necessarily per exchange, do that before or after, so that we can get an efficient protocol for the actual join setup. Okay, so that's the core protocol, and we have some other things ongoing. We'd like to add an appendix on scaling considerations for V, and there has been some start of implementation and planning of interop testing. But we think this is moving on pretty well, and we had one short review from Christian. We are welcome for more reviews or comments, and at some point we'd like to see if this is ready for the working group. Any questions or comments? Okay. Well, thank you for your attention.
Great. Thanks, Johan. So I guess we'll probably talk about it just in a second, but at some point we'll send a call for adoption to the working group list, and people will want to adopt it or not. Okay. So I think that brings us back to the chair slides. Tell me if I'm wrong. Daniel's trying to get in early. I think we just need we have the any other business part of our Lake agenda still, Daniel.
So we have the charter update as well.
There's no slides on that though, is there?
No, there are no slides. So you're right.
But Militia, why don't you go ahead and
Sure. So this is just an update. I guess everyone has already seen this, that the working group has been rechartered. We have several items of new work in that charter. So I would just like to sync up with everyone on the progress of these documents. So the first item is on the rekeying, ad hoc rekeying that was proposed by John and Rafa. So I would just like to check whether it would be possible to have a draft by the next Prague meeting on this, whether that is feasible in terms of the timeline. Can we have a comment from John or I don't see Rafa on the call?
Yeah. That's the plan. I think it's
okay.
feasible. Yeah.
Okay, so let's write down in the minutes then that the plan is to have an ID for the Prague meeting that we can discuss. The next item that we have is on third-party assisted authorization. We already have a draft on that, and then we have some less mature work on remote attestation and status verification of ad hoc peers. So it would be appreciated to have just some feedback on these to the working group. I know Marco wanted to write an informational document gathering implementation considerations. Marco, maybe could you comment on this one? What is your plan and how do you envisage this work?
Hi. Yeah, I have early notes. I can aim realistically at a version 0 with a skeleton with those notes in, at least nothing super mature, but as a starting point, it should work fine, I hope.
Okay. I guess that's about it on my side. Do we have any other questions on the new work or any other items that we would like to bring up?
Marco here. There was another point in the charter also about work for synchronizing application profiles, also together with target attributes about that. And that's also another quite short document I had in mind to start. It's even easier than the implementation consideration document. I can also have that in the queue.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marco. We have Christian in the queue.
Yeah, Christian Amses, I'd also like to present the Greece draft in Prague.
In Prague. Okay, so it seems we'll have a full agenda in Prague. That's great. So with many new works, and we can discuss these then in Prague in person, I hope. With that, I think we are good to go, Stephen, unless there is any other business. So there is Giovanni Federiceski in the queue. Giovanni, would you, yes?
Yes, thank you. I would like to mention briefly that regarding Joran's presentation about the zero configuration draft, that we have an implementation planned. We have some work going on supporting the EAD implementation for ad hoc, and we have the implementation for the draft itself planned.
Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you, Giovanni. I see Tero in the queue.
Yeah, Tero Kivinen. So in IEEE, there's this standard 15.9, which is a key management for 15.4. And I think ad hoc would be Lake would be a very good protocol for that also. So I was asking if there's anybody interested here to actually work on that and make an amendment for that key management document to actually add an ad hoc there. It already has an 1X and, ICANN, HIP and some other protocols, but it doesn't have a TLS because nobody was interested to do that, and it doesn't have a Lake. So I think a Lake would be actually very good for that because it would be probably quite okay on that kind of constrained environment.
Sure. So, Tero, I mean, if you could drop a note to the list with the coordinates of that IEEE thing, then that might help to recruit somebody if they.
All right.
If that's what you want. Thanks. Okay. So, any other business for Lake before we pass over to Daniel to? Not seeing anything. I think we're done. It's a short meeting. We haven't had any last call comments to argue about so far. We'll see by the end of next week if we get more. And with that, I guess the lake session is finished. If you want to escape, then now's a good time to do that. And otherwise, we'll move on to ACE. And Daniel, do you want to be in charge? I'll just press any buttons you need. We're not getting your audio in the room, Daniel. No.
It seems you're muted.
Logan, can you?
So we can see both Logan and Daniel. So
Logan, is your audio working? Can you test?
I can.
Okay, we can hear you. So, so you guys.
So thank you, Stefan. Thank you again. Daniel, while Daniel is fixing his mic, I'm just like to thank all of the working group participants. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to. I'm not able to be on site. So are all of the presenters ready, and are they in the room?
I think we have a couple of presenters in the room, but you have some remote, as I understand, also.
Okay. So Daniel, are you ready?
So, shall I just randomly pick a presentation and we see what happens?
Yes. Just let's stick to the agenda, the one that we have, and the first one is ACE ED ad hoc OS core profile by Goran.
Okay.
I think Goran is in the room.
Yes, I can pass you
Yes.
the slide.
Hi, Goran. Please
Hello.
proceed.
Thank you. Okay, so this is an update of one of the ACE profiles. Well, it's actually the only profile I think we have in the queue at the moment. So this is the ad hoc OSCOR profile. Please move to the next. I'm moving myself, sorry. Here are the next slide. So quick, this is a quick recap about the state of the draft and what's it about. So the setting here is essentially taking the ACE workflow and putting it in an ad hoc OSCOR context. So we previously have DTLS profile, we have a TLS profile, we have OSCOR only profile, and this is the ad hoc and OSCOR profile. And this slide is illustrating that by means of an example. This is example from Appendix A2, an optimized workflow. And what we see here is the usual interaction between client resource server and authorization server. We recognize from ACE and OAuth, where the client is authenticating to the authorization server, in this case using ad hoc, and then establishing the security context for OSCOR, sending the post/token RESTful request to the authorization server, and getting an access token back and some access information. And in this case, we're using the combined delivery of ad hoc and OSCOR. So this is 2 round trips in total. And then having received the access token, the client runs the ad hoc exchange with the resource server. And in this case, it puts the access token as one external authorization data. So that's the access token contains the authorization information for running ad hoc and setting up, and the access rights associated with requesting the resources on the resource server. And in the same way as in the previous exchange, this is combined with OSCORE. So in the second request to the resource server, there is already the access request combined with the last message of ad hoc. And then in the OSCORE response, there is the enforced access response based on the rights in the access token, if the client has the right to access this resource. So that's basically the message flow in the optimized version. And the state of the draft is in version 2 is essentially a simplification of version 1. So there are some fewer pages. We have removed the use of the ad hoc key update function. As you may remember, there were 3 different ways of updating keys in the previous version. And now there is only 2. It's either, if you have an OSCORE context, you can use the kudos protocol, the key update for OSCORE, which is a core draft, which is a very lightweight way of updating security context, or you could rerun, start from the beginning, sort of rerun ad hoc, which has, of course, good security features in terms of separation of keys and so on. So that's taken out, the key update, which simplified the protocol. And we also moved out the alternative workflow where the AS is posting the token instead of the client. So that's described in a separate draft to be discussed in this session, later in this session, where we have, but we still have a workflow which is making use of that feature. And also some updated examples. There are also some things, plan changes. In the previous slide, we saw an exchange where the proof of possession of the client private key was made using ad hoc, but there might be cases when you need to explicit proof of possession. That needs to be specified. And there are also some IANA registrations needed for quite a few new confirmation methods. These CNF, if you remember the claims, the CNF claims from the OAuth, or from CBOR web tokens. And that's for the next version. So that wraps up the presentation of version 2 and the next steps. Any questions are welcome, or take part in the related discussion. So there are some side meetings, informal side meetings planned for this week. One is tomorrow at 1 o'clock local time, discussing the case of how to optimize access tokens for multiple RSs and the privacy issues related to that. So there is some ideas around this. 1 o'clock local time in the, I don't know the coordinates physically, but virtually they are in Gather. So we use the Gather tool linked at the bottom of this slide. And the hackathon room in Gather. I suppose it will be the physical hackathon room as well, but I don't know. We'll find out tomorrow. And then there is also another side meeting which is discussing a lot of things, but one of the topics is onboarding of RS into an ecosystem, and that's on Wednesday 8:30 local time. Also hackathon room in Gather, and I think it's Christian Amsus or Michael Richardson who will be chairing that meeting. So welcome to join. That completes the presentation. Unless there are any questions.
Yes, there is from Christian, I think.
Yeah, just something that I think I can bring up here already. Given that we've discussed let's not have anything unencrypted that we can encrypt. Might it, independently of those side meeting discussions, make sense to transport the token in message 3, because there it can be encrypted, and I think it's early enough for party R to act on?
Yeah, that's very good point, Christian. I'm trying to go back in slides here. Here we are. So basically, what you're saying is that here we put the access token in EAD1, which is fine if it's encrypted. But if it's only signed, the access token, then we could put it in EAD3 instead. And you couldn't act on it before anyway, because you have basically encrypted the identity. It's revealed only at that stage. So yeah, I think that's a fair comment. We should bring that into discussion and make an issue in this either in this draft or some of the new drafts looking at these overall changes to the framework or additions to the framework. Thanks, Christian. Okay, I've taken more than my 5 minutes now, so I'm stepping down.
Okay. So next is co-op EST Go, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you, Logan. So this is, yeah, I have the control. Thank you, Stephen. So this is the presentation of the EST OSCOR draft. You can see the co-authors on this page. So this draft was adopted during the shortly after the previous IETF meeting in Yokohama. Since then, we went under several two revisions, essentially, to address mainly Marco Tilokas' review that was sent out on the ACE list. We discussed this review in two ACE interim meetings, and finally there was an ACE interim on 6th of June 2023, where we discussed some of the updates that I will be presenting in this presentation. So my goal of this presentation is essentially to present these resolutions to the issue that we discussed in the interim regarding server-side generated private keys, and to ask for reviews of this draft in order that we progress it further. So the issue that we discussed during the interims was on server-generated private keys, and we agreed on the action to take, which is to keep the option of server-generated private keys in the draft, but with a big fat warning on security. So this was discussed in the ACE interim, as I said, in June. So ever since I took an action to implement this big fat warning in the draft, and you can see this in the next slide. So the intent of this text here that I present is to give the sense to the developer what it means to generate private keys on the server, and to do it only if it's absolutely necessary. And we define more precisely what absolutely necessary means, meaning that if this draft is used together with the ad hoc protocol, which EST OSCOR uses for mutual authentication of EST client and EST server, we forbid the usage of server-generated private keys. But we leave the option that if the draft is used with pre-shared OSCOR context for authentication, meaning that cryptographically secure random number generator may not necessarily be available on the device, we leave the option that the EST client may use the server-generated private key functions and request it. So I kindly request feedback on this text, whether it can be improved both editorially and normatively. So please go through it and send any comments to the list or to me privately. The second update in the latest version of the draft is related to the security considerations on channel binding. So the context is that channel binding is both optional in EST OSCOR and in RFC 9148. In RFC 9148, channel binding is achieved by including the TLS unique byte string in the CSR. And the main motivation behind this is the triple shake attack on DTLS 1.2, and the channel binding serves as a mitigation against this kind of attack. In a nutshell, the triple shake attack works by because the previous TLS unique value did not include the whole handshake transcript, and this was fixed later with one RFC on DTLS 1.2, and it's no longer feasible with TLS 1.3 because TLS unique now includes the full handshake transcript. ESTO score works similarly and achieves the channel binding by including the ad hoc unique byte string in the CSR. And ad hoc unique byte string is generated through the ad hoc exporter interface, which relies on the full handshake transcript and is therefore not susceptible to the triple shake kind of attack. So what I did is that we kept the channel binding optional, even though it might not be necessary to protect against the triple shake kind of attack, with an added security consideration in the draft. So this is the text of the security consideration. Again, this is the diff between the current and the previous version of the draft. Namely, it stresses the motivation behind the channel binding, and it and makes it optional as a mitigation against any other attacks that might be discovered in future, as it is stressed in the last sentence of this text. So again, I welcome any feedback on this text, and please send to the list or to me privately or to the authors list, of course, any feedback that you might have. So the next steps are, we are kindly looking for more reviews in order to progress this draft. And I would ideally like to working group last call it before the next IETF in Prague. So for that, we would need some feedback on the state and on the current text that is available in the data tracker. So I would kindly ask the chairs to request the reviews on my behalf and in order to progress the draft. So that would be all in terms of my presentation.
Thank you. We'll make sure to do the follow-up. Next.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any questions before we proceed to the next one? I don't see any hands that are raised. Okay. Next is OS Code GM admin. Marco.
Yes, hi. Do you plan to share and control the slides?
Yes,
okay.
Stefan is doing it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Stefan.
GM admin, is that it?
Okay, hi everyone. This is a quick one. It's an update on GM admin document. Next slide, please. So we've worked quite a lot on this document in the past months, and we regularly presented it at ACE interim meetings. And last time we presented it in early June, I think we had two main points open, really, and finally making the document split that we did as agreed, and a number of clarifications and editorial needs in different sections. So on the document split that happened, we submitted, in fact, a new version 9 of this main document, GMadmin, from which we took out all the content related to its use with Coral, which is now a separate document resulting from the split. More on that later. but focused on this particular document mentioned already at that interim meeting of this list of action. It is by default now true that unless the administrators decide otherwise when creating the group does support the pairwise mode of group of score. And we further clarified additional things that group members can do, should do, cannot do, depending on what particular changes happen during the group life in its configuration. And we also clarified possible side effects in terms of group membership, rekeying and whatnot, in case the update to the group configuration is so reckless that results in a change in the maximum size of the identifiers used in the group. And there was also a few editorial fixes to do related to renaming of some parameters in other related documents, especially group of score in the core working group. So that's the version 9 stable and done as we wanted, with no remaining issues that we know about. And then we have, as I mentioned, the new version 0 document, where basically this same method and protocol for administering OSCORE groups is presenting building on the previous document, but in particular using Coral. And it's now approved by the chairs and visible in the data tracker. Next slide, please. And that is it, because yeah, we have version 9 of the main document. Again, we think it's ready and we are not aware of any open issues, so we think that it's eligible for starting a working group last call. For the new document based on Coral in version 0, yeah, according to plans, the split was done to not have the main document delayed by the progress of Coral in core. So this second document will proceed as Coral proceeds in core, but still it's a live document now that of course we plan to maintain. There's just a third procedural thing. There's an issue, a technical issue on the GitHub repo for the main document, where the editor's copy in HTML, as far as I could see, builds but is not deployed. So I kindly ask if anyone with admin privileges in that repo can fix the page deployment. We can live with that, but I believe as we go on, it can be more and more inconvenient. Alicia.
This is just to raise that I have the same issue with EST OSCORE, so it would be really appreciated if this would be fixed.
Other repos I have to do with are fine on this side, by the way. Okay, we have two already. Yeah, that was the last slide.
Of any other questions? If not, then I think we can proceed to record, which is presentation about ACE group OS core profile.
Do you want me to give you the controller?
No, you can.
Okay.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Right. So, hello everyone. Today I want to present an update on this group of score profile of ACE, which has now reached version 11. So, next slide, please. And first, I wanted to go over a bit the motivation and intent and what kind of gap that we want to fill with this work. And yeah, just to start off, what's the motivation? Well, there are application scenarios that rely on group communication, where you would like a client that to be able to access resources on multiple resource servers. And you can have secure communication by sharing a set of key material. But the question becomes, how can you enforce access control within the group for resources at the servers? And I mean, if you think about very basic and simple use cases, like a basic lighting control scenario, it may be very much fine to have a straightforward and plain access control, in the sense that just joining the group means that you will be authorized to perform anything at any other group member's resource, basically. So there's no fine-grained resource control for accessing resources on servers in the group. It's just group membership entails full access to the resources of servers in the group. However, for more advanced use cases, you may very well want a situation where different clients have different access rights, and you need a more fine-grained approach than that very basic setup. Next slide, please. So what kind of properties would we like in that scenario, and what kind of properties do we like for this work? Well, we want to separate these two concepts. Number one being the membership of being a member of the group, and the other is actual access control. So that means that just because you're a group member, that does not give you any specific access rights to resources on servers in the group. So the concepts that are to be separate here are access control to the actual secure group communication channel, meaning you can communicate within the group because you're a group member. And what this work then covers is how do you have access control to the resource space provided by the servers in the group. And I think one thing we are now stressing also in the latest version is that this is very much aligned with the zero trust paradigm that is defined in this NIST document that we link to. Because the point there is that you shouldn't have trust granted implicitly. It should be continually evaluated, and more than that, the access control enforcement should be as granular as possible. So again, just because you're a member of the group, that should not imply any specific access rights to resources at servers in the group. Next slide, please. So now the question becomes, so how do you accomplish this? You may think that, okay, what about just creating one security group for each different set of access rights that you want to have, which can work. However, the problem there is that it scales very poorly, and it also becomes hard to manage, because this means in practice that if the access rights change, you need to join a different security group, and you also need to rekey the groups. So, well, why not use the ACE framework, which is, well, dedicated to this purpose of providing access control? So there's already work here on the point of accessing the secure group communication channel, meaning joining the group and provisioning key material to the members such that they can communicate in the group with group OSCORE. And that's done in this ACE key group com OSCORE document. So that exists, and that is already defined. But then it comes to what we want to do in this work, which is defining how you do fine-grained access control to the resource space of the resource servers in the group. And that's what's missing. And if you look at the current profiles of ACE, none of them cover secure group communication between the client and the RSS. And, well, none of them use group OSCORE as the security protocol. So essentially, the profile to accomplish this is missing, and that's the profile we're now wanting to create. Next slide, please. So what is this about concretely, and what's the contribution? This is a new profile of ACE, the group OSCORE profile of ACE, that enables access control for accessing resources at group members. And group OSCORE is used as the security protocol between the client and resource servers. And just to point out that the group joining step has to happen first, and that's defined in a separate document. So that's a separate procedure, and that's assumed to have happened first. And then once you're in the group and you have joined the group, now this work will provide access control for resources in the group. And what it accomplishes is that we're binding the access token to an already existing group OSCORE security context, and we're also binding it to the authentication credential of the client that the client is using within the group for communication. And some properties that the profile achieves is, well, we have proof of possession of the client's private key. And that happens when the first time a group of score request from the client is verified. And yes, a note, we also support both the group mode and pairwise mode of group of score. So group of score has 2 modes, and both of those are supported. So we also have proof of group membership for an exact client. And we also achieve mutual authentication, and that will happen upon completion of the first group of score exchange. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so I wanted to show here an overview of the protocol flow. So basically, of course, if you know ACE, you may recognize a lot of the steps here. I don't go into this in detail line by line, but something to point out here is that when the client is requesting a token, it includes its sender ID that is using within the group of score group, that is this SID 0x00. And furthermore, the client includes the actual group ID that of the group that it's a member. So, and then when you actually get the token back, this information is included within the access token. So we're binding the access token to the identity of the client and the identifier of the group. And then, yeah, you proceed as, well, similar to a normal ACE flow, and you post the token to the resource server. And after you have done that, now you can actually start communicating using group of score in this case. And of course, that can be either you're going to a resource server unicast, but you can also now, of course, take advantage of multicast and perform a group request to multiple resource servers at the same time. And if you want more detailed content of the actual, well, the content of the messages exchanged, I have them also as backup slides, and of course these are documented in the draft text. Yeah, next slide, please. So there was, now we're up to version 11, and the last time we presented this was version 4. So it's been a couple of versions in between, but I wanted to cover some of the most main updates that have been done since version 4. And one thing we did actually was we used to have this appendix that was quite big on what we call the dual mode, where we were allowing for combined usage of OSCORE and group OSCORE using this single profile. So you could use both of those as security protocols. But we realized that, well, yes, it may be better just to focus this purely on group OSCORE, and that also means that we can greatly shorten and simplify the document. So that big appendix has been removed. What we also did was to stress more that this profile supports access tokens for group audiences in a seamless manner. So practically this means that the access token will be intended for multiple resource servers, and the client can, if it wants to, post such an access token to many or all of those resource servers at once by basically using IP multicast. So you don't have to go one by one posting your token. And just as a reminder, the way things are set up in group OSCORE is such that the client will actually obtain authentication credentials of the resource servers in the group from the group manager. And so it's not retrieving that information from the authorization server. So that kind of functionality is really decoupled. Next slide, please. And yeah, another thing that we did was to stress again that we are aligned with this zero trust paradigm. And we're really in harmony with how they NIST recommends that you perform zero trust. And again, this is about not implicitly granting trust, but explicitly checking it and continually evaluating it. We also did some other things on the more, let's say, protocol details. And one thing we updated here was the format of the public authentication credentials. So this RecCNF field that specifies the authentication credential of the client. And now we have aligned the format of those credentials with the exact formats of credentials that GrupoScore supports. And that's really about, well, CBOR web tokens, CWT claim set, X509 certificates, and C509 certificates. And the actual CWT confirmation methods, they are defined in the ACE ad hoc OSCOR profile document. So we're taking advantage of what has been defined in that document. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, just to summarize, this is about an ACE profile for secure group communication that enables you to have fine-grained access control within an OSCOR group. And well, we're now kind of focused it to be exclusively looking at the GrupoScore as a security protocol due to removal of that big appendix. And yeah, I mean, the core of the actual profile has been stable for quite some time. There hasn't been big changes in functionality. And what we've been doing now recently is really, well, polishing and simplifying and clarifying a number of things, yeah, also based on points of feedback we received from people. And yeah, at this point, we think that this version is ready to consider for working group adoption. And yeah, next slide, please. I think that's the last one, though. But yeah, thank you. So any comments or questions are very welcome. And yeah, thank you for listening.
So I don't see any. Christian has a question. Please.
Yeah, Christian, mixture of question, more of a comment. The work there on the group audiences looks very valuable, also for what I plan to talk about in the side meeting that Jörn has suggested. So I'd very much appreciate if you joined there. And that, so this looks like a good contribution, not only for this particular case, but for ACE in more general.
Yes, I think I will definitely join that side meeting, and I think there can definitely be some synergy there. So sounds very good. Okay, thank you.
There are no other questions. The next one is Marco is Outcred DTLS profile. Oh wait, we have I think a question from Guren.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just curious about, is there any point of view on the adoption process here? Is there something that you want to bring up later or take to the list or have a discussion around? I'm in favor. I think this draft has been really doing a good job motivating its place here, and I think this is a valuable component. So I'm in favor of adopting the draft. I just wanted to hear what you think. What is the process? When do you want to bring that up? Or is that something coming later?
That's a question to the chairs, I guess.
Oh, to the chairs. Okay, then yes, we will go forward for starting a call for adoption.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, sounds good.
Thank you, Guren.
Okay.
Marco, are you ready?
Again? Yes, thanks. Hi again. This is Marco. This is a brand new document that was anticipated in a slot in the Yokohama meeting. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this was our motivation. We have the DTLS profile of ACE that supports also an RPK mode, where the authentication credentials are raw public keys that are exactly transported as cozy keys. And we just noticed that, well, we may have other representations of raw public keys in the first place, and then nothing really would change in the later DTLS handshake if those are used. But we may also have public key certificates, and for those, the DTLS handshake is in principle ready. It's just another type of certificate to exchange on the wire. So basically, it would be good to extend the DTLS profile as is now to support also this other type of credentials. Next slide, please. Right, that's what we propose, a formal update of 9202 define the DTLS profile. And it worked nicely from a presentation point of view to present it as, at first, an extension of the RPK mode to support still raw public keys, but additional to COSI keys, also the CCS format. And then introducing a third new mode that we call certificate mode, where basically the authentication credentials can be public key certificates. And this would very seamlessly work also in case TLS is used instead in the security protocol, as it was recently standardized as an extension to that same profile in RFC 9430. Next slide, please. Right, of course you need to exchange credentials on the wire, and like for the previously presented document here, fortunately we can reuse the same CWT confirmation methods that are defined in the ad hoc OSCOR profile, but in this setup. And then, of course, we transport practically the credentials into the RecCNF parameter in the token request message, so conveying the client's authentication credential, which will then be specified in the CNF claim on the access token. And finally, the resource server authentication credential will be specified in the token response in the RS CNF parameter. So of course, within those parameters or claim, you need to resort to the exact CWT confirmation method consistent with the exact format of credential you are using. You also have some degree of freedom. You can create hybrid setups. So if you stick to the RPK mode, it's not that both public keys have to be CCS. They can both be, or both be COSI key, which is the current case today, or they can be one format each. If you go for the certificate mode, it's not that both certificates have to be X509 or C509. You can have the hybrid case, or you can somehow even partially overlap the two modes. So you may have one authentication credential as CCS and the other one as C509 certificate. And that last alternative is, by the way, not crazy. It's actually formal, admitted, and discussed in RFC 7250, where you can have a handshake based on one credential, which is a raw public key, and one credential that is a certificate. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then we have the example. This is the example for the RPK mode extended to consider CCS. So it's pretty simple, no hybrid combination here. Just the client's RPK as a CCS included in RecCNF in the token request. This is going to be transferred into the CNF claim of the access token. And then in the token response, providing the access token to the client, we also have the resource server's RPK also as a CCS in the RS CNF parameter. Next slide, please. And this is the new certificate mode in principle, where in the same parameter, we have as the only difference that the CWT confirmation method is X5 chain in order to transport, in this case, X509 certificates used as authentication credentials for both client and resource server. Next slide, please, which should be the last one. Yes, as next step, I think it would be worth considering the exchange of credential also by reference, not only by value, like it is the case now, and I showed in the example. And again, we also have ready already a CWT confirmation methods from that same document again that can be used, we can use for that. We certainly have to add security considerations in case the authentication credentials are CCS, but I expect those to be basically the same ones considered in the last version of ad hoc for the same reasons. But the core of the idea and of the contribution, I guess, is already clear and fairly stable. So till then, comments and feedback are very welcome anyway. Thank you.
So any other questions? So there are no other questions. The last one is from Marco. Sorry, not the last one. The last one for Marco.
Right. Thanks.
Yes,
Okay, this is another brand new document, also anticipated during the same presentation slot in ACE in Yokohama. Next slide, please. Yeah, we noted few things and then we agreed to address in this same single document. Right now, the ACE framework considers one single execution flow. Traditionally, that has been the case. So the client requests the access token from the AS, and then it uploads it to the resource server before accessing resources in a protected way. And this is not the ideal workflow to use, although it is the only one right now. In case, for example, you have a constrained communication leg between the client and resource server that should be limited to the exchange of very small messages, while the situation is better between AS and RS. And here you may guess where this is going. In parallel, and back on the topic of group audience, well, they are defined by ACE already. So as long as you rely on public authentication credentials for resource server, you can issue a single token targeting multiple resource servers at once. But then the problem is that you should provide the client together with a token with those credentials. And there are no means to do that today because the RS-CNF parameter is, well, not structured. It's supposed to include one single authentication credential. So group audiences are defined, but practically unless the profile somehow can make it work in some other ways, in general, you cannot take advantage of the group audience concept. Next slide, please. Yeah, and the goal of this document is to address these 2 points separately in principle with some overlapping where necessary. So it's formally a proposed update to 9200, the main ACE framework document. And on one side, it is about defining a new alternative workflow where the authorization server, after issuing the access token, also uploads it to the resource server on behalf of the client. In parallel, we are also defining additional ACE parameters, a very little set for now, because we found them to be the most important at the moment. We'll see them in the next slides, but one parameter is basically enabling the practical use of the new workflow. The other parameters are in the interest of transferring multiple resource server authentication credentials at once, so actually enabling the use of group audience as ACE meant to. Next slide, please. Okay, on the alternative workflow, it's as in this figure, so it starts as usual, really, the client requesting an access token to the authorization server, and the authorization server makes an attempt to upload the access token to the resource server, just like the client would do, but in that communication leg. And things can go fine or not. Well, that's going to be evident in the response A2 from the resource server to the authorization server. And at that point, the authorization server knows the outcome of this operation. And then it responds to the client anyway with access information. But if the attempt to upload the access token was successful, the authorization server does not provide the access token to the client. Rather, it includes a new parameter that comes up also later with value true, basically saying, I've tried, it worked, it's all okay. Go ahead, skip step C1, and just go ahead with step C2 and access the resource. Or if things go wrong, went wrong, the authorization server includes the access token to the client that may have better luck, and includes that parameter again with value false, just to say, I failed, please try yourself with step C1 as usual. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are examples of what I just described. So for the two situation where the upload by the authorization server worked fine, so the token is not included in the token response. And the second case below where the upload failed, and well, it's up to the client to try by itself. But in either case, since there was an attempt, the new token uploaded parameter is included with the value reflecting the outcome of the operation. Next slide, please. Yeah, on the parameters, yeah, we've seen one already, really, a Boolean parameter included in the response to the client. Its presence is already indicative of the fact that the new workflow has been used, and the value indicates if the attempted upload failed or not. If it failed, the token is included for the client to try on its own. If it succeeded, the token is not included. But then moving to the other main point addressed by this document, the practical enabling of the group audiences and the possibility to transfer to the client multiple authentication credentials of multiple resource servers, we are introducing two parameters that really go hand in hand, both for the response to the client. They are RS, CNF2, and subject IDs. So it is effectively possible for the authorization server to issue a token for a group audience and to provide it to the client together with all the resource server's authentication credentials. Next slide, please. Yeah, and we can see it better in this slide. RS CNF2 is really the structured version of RS CNF, no more no less. It's a single array that must be non-empty, and each element is the authentication credential of one resource server in the group audience for which the access token has been issued. You don't need every authentication credential to be of the same type. One can be a certificate, one can be a CCS, considering what we are trying to enable. It's okay. And then you have the companion parameter, subject IDs. It's also an array, non-empty, must be present if RSCNF is present. And each element is basically an identifier of the resource server in the same position in the array of RSCNF2. So there is a strict ordering and pairing with the elements of RSCNF2. As identifiers, and as an early thought, maybe this can be extended or improved, we considered absolute URIs, or in the interest of compactness, absolute CRI references, thinking of the document that we have in core, developing those. So only with scheme and authority, and that should be sufficient to univocally identify the resource server in question. And then we have an example here and also in the draft. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is it for now. What you see now should be already fairly stable and easy to understand. We have some more ideas in mind, especially on the parameter side, that right now are compiled as open points and ideas in Appendix B of the document. So the next steps are really building of those and see if we can add more if it's really useful and needed. This is especially in the interest of ensuring that the alternative workflow can be used for as many and in general all profiles of ACE, and that also more advanced operations like updating of access rights and token repost remain possible to perform. And this may, together with other reasons, lead, of course, to the definition of some more parameters than the 3 we have now. Till then, we'd appreciate any comment and feedback. Thank you.
Hello. Hey, Dave Robin. Great presentation, Marco. I am, from the BACnet community, very excited to see this because we solved this problem in a different way, and we had this exact same problem. But the AS pushes the tokens down into the RS ahead of time on behalf of clients that can't get their own tokens for some reason. But here is a case where the client is willing to, but it's already been pushed down there. And so and this basically says, don't bother, I've already sent it, because we had to go to so much trouble if the client gets a token and it's in somewhat conflict with the one that was pushed earlier, which one wins? In other words, he presents a token, but one's already there, that kind of thing. So anyway, I'm excited to see this work go forward. Our document just went out for public review, which means we can change it. So if some stuff works here out that's a better way of doing it, we're really excited to see that, and we can add that to our next version. So fully support this direction. It's great.
Thanks, appreciate it.
So I believe that we could also issue a call for adoption for this one. Okay. No questions? So I guess then the last one is Sri Lakshmi Sudarsan. Did I pronounce it properly?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Sri. I'm from Lulu University, and I'll be presenting today. And Ulo is online. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yep. Yep. So I would like to bring these 2 open issues that we found in ACE. The first one is the validation of the authorization server problem, and the second one is the how to register the client to the AS problem. Next slide, please. So this is about the communication between the client and the AS. So in section 5.1 of RFC 9200, it talks about the that the client who request for the access token before this step, the client send a unauthorized initial resource request to the RS. So and in response to that, it gets the identification of the AS, or for example, like AS URI. So the question here is that how does the authorization server validates how does the client validates that this is the right authorization server that it is intended to communicate with? Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, here in the token request response, this is the step that I just mentioned. So before this step, the client gets the AS URI from the RS, and how does the client say it is the right AS to that is responsible to send the access token for this particular to issue the access token for this particular RS. Yeah, this is the validation problem that we identified. Next slide, please. Yeah, this can be connected with the client registration problem. So this is also between C and client and the authorization server, where the secure channel is established, which is defined in the 9202, where in section 3.1, and it is expected that the client is expected to register with the AS before, say, it before sending an access token request, or like sending a request for the access token, and also sending in the keying materials, for example, to establish the secure channel. So how do we do this, or how the client is expected to register? So there were some solutions I seen in for example, the keying material, like manual configuration or automated provisioning process. So this whole situation can be referred as client registration issue, and it can also be considered as part of onboarding problem, or say bootstrapping, or can also be referred as enrolling. Yep, next slide, please. So I'd like to bring up this mining station use case to discuss these two problems. So we have a truck, a smart truck, which is the client, and the mining station, which is the resource server, and the truck sending a resource request to get the resource from the mining station, and it send back an AS URI or some identification of the AS that the truck has to go to, and the truck establishes a secure channel and asks for the access token for this particular mining station. So the question is, like, how does the truck know this is the right AS that it has to go to, and how does the truck know this is the right AS that it has to that is honored to produce the access tokens for this particular mining station? So one possible solution, or the suggested one, selected one, is to include a delegation step from the contractor. Here the contractor is the device owner or the owner of the smart truck. So when we include a step, delegation step from the device owner to the truck, so that it can include some client some credentials send some credentials to the truck, so that the truck can use that to validate the AS, and also say it can use these credentials to register with the authorization server. Next slide, please. Yeah, there are other possible solutions that is spread in different RFCs. These are the one that we could find. So one possible solution is that the client asking the device owner, like it gets the AS URI from the resource server, and it's asking the DO, okay, this is the one that I got right now, and is this a legitimate resource? AS, so that I can connect to it. So like calling back home kind of thing. And next one is an online lookup mechanism. So say the client got a list of trusted AS, so that it can cross-check and validate the AS. And another one is the delegation of access, right, which is the one that I mentioned, discussed using the use case of mining station, which is the delegation of the access rights from the device owner to the client. So POA-based authorization, like a power of attorney-based authorization, which I explained in detail in the draft, can be considered as a delegation of access right technique. And similarly, like the client registration problem, one solution which is mentioned somewhere is the dynamic client registration. Then delegation of access, same one delegation of access, right? If the DO delegate the client, so that the client can use these credentials to register with the AS. And if we consider the client registration problem as part of the onboarding issue, there are also some other zero-touch provisioning methods as well. Next slide, please. I think that's the last one. So any comments on these problems? I think your end is.
Yeah, hi Sri, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I just had a
Should
question. Okay, is it okay?
Yes,
to
please
ask a
go
question?
ahead. Yes, please.
Okay, Johan Selander. I was just curious on the previous side, you mentioned it's offline, the setting with a POA-based delegation. How is that offline? What do you mean by offline?
Yeah, it means that for example, the delegation can be provided in terms of like a self-contained token from the device owner to the client, so that the device owner doesn't need to be online all the time during the authorization process, or when the client asking for access tokens from the authorizing server, the device owner doesn't need to be online. That's what I meant by offline mode.
So, but then that means that you need to have all the delegations or all the POAs available then from the start if you're offline.
Yes.
Or so there is no. I just wonder how the mechanics work. So if you get if the RS provides back an AS identifier or a domain name or something like that, you need to be provisioned with all the potential ASs that you would, or is it only the sort of a very small set you're looking at, and then you can have this offline?
Yeah, one solution is that it can take the AS information from the RS and cross-check with what's given from the DO, device owner, or we can just omit the step of going towards RS and asking for AS information if possible. I'm not sure about that, but using the AS information inside the POA to provision, to register with the AS.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, Ulo, do you want to add something?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now, I just wanted to take one step back, and so what you explained there, Sri, especially if you look at this mining use case that you had a slide on.
Previous slide.
If you show that slide, please.
No, next slide. Next, please. Yeah,
this one.
Yes.
So the overall idea of a POA is the same as in the real world when we humans use POA. So in this case, the assumption is that there is a pre-established trust relation between the contractor and the authorization server or the owner of the authorization servers. So then the contractor can send like thousands of smart trucks to this site, and when the AS is going to verify that it's a valid truck, then the truck carries a POA, which is self-contained and signed by the contractor, and the contractor is known by the AS. So it's very much like when I send a proxy to a meeting instead of me, the person carries a POA. So it's exactly the same here, but we are dealing more with devices. And then this POA can contain additional information, like, for example, which AS that should be used. That could be pre-established information between the contractor and the AS owner. So yes, Göran, your comment is really good. Things are pre-established. And then since they're self-contained, the parties, the contractor and the AS owner, they don't need to be online or in the loop when you actually execute and solve these two problems. I hope that clarifies a bit. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any more comments?
So I just wonder what type of what is the basically the component you would like to bring here? Is it a a format for a delegation, or is it a protocol, or what is it you see to be added here? I mean, we've already mentioned that some of these things can be solved by an onboarding procedure, but you seem to have an idea that this is a good way to solve the problems you list. But what is the contribution that you would like to standardize?
Actually, the onboarding, it's like very big issue. I mean, it's not the contractor here is not the manufacturer, as in onboarding case. So this is just the part of how the device owner can delegate its own trusted device to the authorizing server or to another third party network or something like that. And mostly concentrating on this, how to delegate, or how can we make a device work on behalf of a device owner if the device owner is not available right now. How can he delegate his trusted device? Ulo, maybe you can. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think you're right. But as you said, we want to standardize the format of a POA, and that's going to be only the basic, because POAs can be different from case to case, but there will be some kind of base format. And then, of course, a base protocol also for how you interact and send this. But that should not be very complicated. It's essentially a signed textual document.
Yeah. Okay.
We have a question from Marco, right?
Sorry?
Oh, Marco, your hand is raised in the queue.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. If all is pre-configured in the interest of being offline, you don't really expect any error message coming from, well, the mining station, in this case, the resource server, pointing to an AS in an maybe non-credible way. You just know your authorization service in advance. You have no pointers to really validate. You just have your list of good ones, right?
You mean how does the RS know this is the right AS?
Yeah, so you don't expect anymore to just try with the resource servers and getting a probably non-valid indication of an AS to validate somehow. You just need your valid authorization service in advance.
Yeah, I mean there are issues from the opposite, like from AS to the client, or from RS, between the RS and the AS, that we haven't gone to that part. It's only between the client to AS. Never think about the other side, but I think there are some other solutions that you are working on.
But that's good. I think you just don't just try anymore with an RS and see what happens next. You just know what to do and who to contact for the next steps, which is good, I think.
Yeah, I think the one that you explained just before the previous presentation is between the AS and the RS, and the mutual authentication between these two, and how does the RS trust the client. Yeah, that's interesting. So this is the other side of the coin, maybe. Yep. Okay. Any more discussion? Any more comments? Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, no more question. I think, do we have any other business?
No, looks like that. I'm not seeing anything, so I mean, maybe I'll just declare victory and we can get some lunch.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you again for helping us on site. And we look forward to continue the participation on the mailing list. We'll start issuing working group blast call and call for adoption. And thank you again for making that time for this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Daniel and Goran? Okay.
No, I was just saying thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you, Stephen, for leading this.
You're all very welcome.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Melissa.
Cheers.